There is a story that circulates widely online, usually under a catalog number like VAT12772 or some close variation of it. A tablet, supposedly held in a major museum, supposedly kept from the public for decades, that names 5 non-human species who visited Sumer in the 4th and 5th millennia B.C.E. Each species gets a name. Each one gets a motive. And the story always ends the same way, with a date, usually a few years in our own future, when something described only as the collector is said to arrive. Today, we're doing something different from the usual version of this video. Instead of walking you through that story as if it were a real translation, I'm going to show you where it actually comes from, what it borrows from real Sumerian religion, what it invents outright, and why. For Muslim viewers especially, the core claim underneath it isn't just historically unverified, it directly conflicts with basic Islamic belief about how human beings came to exist. I'll flag every piece as we go: real history, a real but non-scholarly modern movement, or outright legend with no source at all. Let's start with what's real. The Anunnaki are a genuine part of Sumerian religion. This is well-documented, established history, not speculation. In actual cuneiform texts, the Anunnaki are described as a category of deities, gods, not visiting aliens, associated with the earth and the underworld, appearing across Sumerian and later Akkadian and Babylonian mythology for well over 1,000 years. Their number, their exact role, and their relationship to other gods like An, Enlil, and Enki vary across different texts and periods, which is completely normal for any ancient polytheistic religion that developed over centuries. That's the entirety of the verified historical claim. The Anunnaki are real names from real ancient religious texts describing gods worshipped by real ancient people. Everything else in the 5 species story, the Igigi as silent extraterrestrial observers, the Anunnaki as armored beings mining Mercury, the Ushumgal as reptilian shapeshifters running a secret 400-year infiltration of Sumerian government, the Nibiruans as benevolent genetic engineers, and the Mardukha as child-abducting gray aliens. None of this exists in any Sumerian text, translated or untranslated, cataloged or uncatalogued. I want to be completely direct about this rather than hedge. There is no tablet at the University of Pennsylvania Museum or anywhere else that describes 5 extraterrestrial species, records astronomical alignments matching modern software calculations, or predicts a collector arriving in a specific future window. No such artifact has ever been logged, photographed, peer-reviewed, or referenced in any actual museum catalog, and the specific claims about a suppressed Freedom of Information Act request, a confidential legal settlement, or a leaked NASA memo. Naming this tablet are not documented anywhere outside of videos telling this exact story. This isn't a case of the evidence is hidden. It's a case of the evidence not existing. So where does this story actually come from? Here's the real, traceable answer, and it's worth understanding because it's a genuinely interesting piece of modern cultural history in its own right. In 1976, a writer named Zecharia Sitchin published a book arguing that the Anunnaki were literally extraterrestrial beings from a planet he called Nibiru, who came to Earth roughly 450,000 years ago to mine gold and genetically engineered early humans as a labor force. Sitchin based this on his own translations of Sumerian and Akkadian texts, translations that professional Assyriologists, the actual scholars trained to read Sumerian cuneiform, have reviewed and rejected as fundamentally mistaken. This rejection isn't a case of an establishment silencing an inconvenient truth. It's the ordinary, well-documented outcome of language experts checking someone's translation work and finding that the underlying grammar and vocabulary simply don't support the claims being made. Sitchin's work is what scholars classify as pseudo-archaeology, a real, definable, and popular genre but one built on translation choices that the academic field studying these languages does not accept. His books sold widely and remain the direct ancestor of nearly every ancient astronaut video made since, including the 5-species story you're describing. The names have been changed and new details invented, but the underlying move, take a real ancient deity's name and reassign it to an extraterrestrial visitor, is exactly Sitchin's original method, repeated and elaborated by later writers and video creators. I want to pause here, because this is the point where this story stops being simply inaccurate and starts being something a Muslim audience in particular needs to hear addressed directly. The 5-species narrative claims that human beings are the product of alien genetic engineering, that our intelligence, our civilizations, even specific historical figures exist because outside species altered us or bred us for a purpose. This is not a minor detail to wave past. In Islamic belief, the creation of the first human being, Adam, is described in the Quran as a direct act of Allah, who shaped him and breathed life into him and commanded the angels to prostrate before him. Human beings are described in the Quran as honored creation, given intellect, moral responsibility, and free will directly by Allah, not as the result of genetic material collected by a visiting species for its own purposes, and not as a hybrid experiment whose results will one day be harvested. A narrative that presents humanity's intelligence and civilization as an alien intervention is not simply an unproven historical claim. It replaces a core matter of Islamic Aqidah, belief regarding the origin and nature of humanity, with a science fiction premise dressed in the language of a documentary. That distinction matters, and this video is not going to blur it the way the original version does. With that said clearly, let's look at why stories like this spread so effectively, because that part is genuinely worth understanding. The 5-species video format borrows real documentary techniques, specific numbers, named locations, invented but official-sounding institutional process like FOIA requests and non-disclosure agreements because specificity reads as credibility, even when none of the specifics can be verified. The claim that 3 independent astronomers using 3 different software programs confirmed a date is a good example. No such study exists, no astronomers are named, and no software or methodology is described in any way that could actually be checked. This is a storytelling technique, not evidence, and it's worth recognizing the pattern anywhere you encounter it, not just here. Numbers presented with extreme precision, institutions named specifically, and sourcing that always stays just out of reach. Linked in the description, never independently locatable. The claim of a future return window, in this case 2027 to 2031, deserves its own direct comment. There is no historical, textual, or scientific basis for treating this date range as meaningful, and presenting it as a countdown to a real event is not something a responsible account of this material should do. Predictions of this kind, framed as inevitable and tied to real future years, can genuinely unsettle people who watch this content, and that's worth taking seriously rather than treating as harmless entertainment. If you found the original version of this story troubling, that reaction makes sense. The video was built specifically to produce it. It is not describing something real. So where does that leave the actual history here? With a genuine, ancient, well-documented religion, Sumerian polytheism, including real deities called the Anunnaki, that later, in the 20th century, became the raw material for a popular but scholarly rejected reinterpretation claiming those gods were literal aliens. That reinterpretation has continued to be elaborated, decade after decade, into increasingly specific and dramatic claims, culminating in stories like the one built around VAT 12772, which invents not just new species, but a fabricated cover-up involving a real named museum, a real government process, and a real scientific institution, none of which have any documented connection to any of this. It's worth adding a final point of historical honesty. The real University of Pennsylvania Museum does hold a genuine and important collection of Sumerian tablets from Nippur, and real Assyriologists have spent over a century doing careful, published, unglamorous work translating them. Administrative records, law codes, hymns, king lists, the actual texture of Sumerian civilization. None of that work has produced anything resembling the five species narrative, and attaching a fictional cover-up to a real institution's name is not a small storytelling liberty. It's an unfounded claim about real people and a real organization, and that's worth being clear-eyed about rather than repeating. We're not here to tell you that 5 alien species visited Sumer, that a suppressed tablet names them, or that something is coming to collect the results in the next few years. What we can tell you, with confidence, is that the Anunnaki are real names from a real ancient religion, that the ancient astronaut reinterpretation of them has a real, traceable origin in 20th century pseudo-archaeology that mainstream scholarship has reviewed and rejected, and that presenting humanity's origin as an alien engineering project isn't just historically unverified. For anyone approaching this from an Islamic perspective, it stands in direct conflict with the Quran's account of Adam's creation. Everything about a specific catalog number, a museum cover-up, a leaked government memo, and a 2027 deadline belongs to invented storytelling, not history, and it's worth saying that plainly rather than letting the line blur. If this kind of thread interests you, where a real ancient religion ends and a modern, commercially successful reinterpretation of it begins, that's exactly the kind of thing worth reading about directly, from real Assyriological scholarship on Sumerian religion on one side, and from honest accounts of how Sitchin's work has been received by the academic field on the other, rather than taking any single dramatized retelling, including the one this story was built to imitate, as the final word. The ancient names were real, once, describing gods a real civilization worshipped for real reasons we can still study today. What got built on top of those names in the last 50 years is a different thing entirely. Newer, more dramatic, and, however entertaining, not a record of anything that happened.